And Matt Braden, thank you, our new family law section chair, along with Matt Lax. But we're going to have Matt Braden introduce our speaker today. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Linda. And on behalf of my co-chair, Matt Lax, I want to thank you all for coming to this very informative webinar put on by Stephen Smith. Stephen is the CEO of Intelligence by Intent. It's an AI strategy advisory firm focused on helping law firms adopt AI with practical and measurable outcomes. He has trained, I'm reading this so I don't get anything wrong. He has trained over 2,500 attorneys, developing over 100 legal specific AI use cases tailored to how lawyers actually work. His approach emphasizes hands on implementation over theory, helping firm leadership identify high impact use cases, navigate ethics requirements, and build internal capabilities for sustained adoption. Stephen is a keynote speaker for the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers and a continuing legal education instructor for the Beverly Hills Bar, the LA County Bar, and our bar. He holds an MBA from the Wharton School at University of Pennsylvania and writes the Intelligence by Intent newsletter at smithstephen.com. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we will try to get to them as soon as possible. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Steve.
Great. Thanks, Matt. And thanks everyone for joining. I'm very happy to be here. I've done one of these for the SFVBA before. And so I hope you all enjoy the update. So with that, let me grab my screen here and turn on sharing. And I'm not going to put it into slideshow mode because I'm going to bounce back and forth between slides and live demos. And as they mentioned, please put questions in. Let me just make sure I've got the question panel back open here. So I've got that. Great. And if I miss one, someone please just flag me down. Go ahead and ask. So again, I'm Steve Smith, and I like to start out with this quote. And what I ask people is, when is the last time that you spent 3 hours on something that AI can do in 3 minutes? And the last time I gave this presentation was probably 18 months ago here, and we have had an absolute tremendous amount of change since then in the capabilities. And I want to spend, the next hour sharing what these tools can do, going through a bunch of real world, family law examples, and again, being open for questions for what you want to focus on. So I don't know how many of you know Scott Cloper. Scott is a family law lawyer in Encino. And I first trained Scott's firm several years ago. He got me in with a bunch of the bar associations, and I've worked with him extensively. And he lives and breathes in these tools. And this is one of the only slides that I'll read kind of word for word because I think the quote is so good. And as Scott says, he says, "Look, ChatGPT is so essential to every activity I do all day long. The only way I would stop using it is if they pried it from my cold dead hands." And I've worked with a number of attorneys in the last couple of years now, and the more people use it and they adopt it in their practice and change their workflows, this is the feeling that more and more people get. So, Matt already introduced me. I've trained thousands of attorneys at this point, given AI presentations. I actually had the privilege of speaking at the AAML keynote in Arizona last week. So this is all really fresh, a lot of great questions, and all of the content you're going to see is similar to what they saw there, as are some of the examples. So what I hope you walk away with today is a couple of things. The first is there are really two key concepts I want people to understand. So when you're looking at AI tools for your organization, there's really two things that matter these days in terms of usability and reliability and things like that. I will give very brief updates on the latest frontier models. I primarily focus on ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude. There are other models out there. I mean, some organizations use Microsoft Copilot. There's XAI from Grok. There are open source models. But this is what most organizations focus on, are sort of the big three out there, outside of specialized tools that, from Westlaw and Lexis and Harvey and things like that. But these are tools that anybody can access to drive real improvements in their business. And I'll do a bunch of legal demos. And again, I'm happy to take questions. So if you have an idea or a question or a concept and like to know, can an AI tool do this, that, or the other thing, let me know. And I'm happy to share it with you and show you. So the first thing I want to mention is I will talk briefly about these. So the absolute latest models that we have right now. So from OpenAI, they make ChatGPT, and their latest model is ChatGPT 5.4. The latest model from Anthropic, which makes the Claude series of models, the one in the middle, is Opus 4.6. And Google has the Gemini series of models, and their latest model is Gemini 3.1 Pro. And all of these have been released in the last month. We're seeing, it used to be sort of every 6 months that we would get big new improvements in model capability. We're now seeing big improvements every 1, 2, and 3 months. It really is changing. And the capabilities that these tools have now, again, even from 6 months or a year ago, is pretty astonishing. So I'd like to start with this. This is really interesting, is I don't know how many of you ever have a need to create an infographic to explain a settlement, to explain a complex series of transactions or something in a case. 6 months ago, to create a chart like this, you would have had to hire a graphics expert to come in and describe, the complexities of a settlement, right? So this is a fictitious settlement for an $850 million estate. There's real estate portfolios, there's business interests, there's financial assets. And this actually was generated from a single prompt in a tool called Nano Banana. And I will show you an example of it in a minute, but what's happened now, so Google's Gemini tool has the ability to create the most complex infographics with, perfect typing, amazing graphics. You can change the style. So if you're looking for ways to explain, it really is something that, again, a few months ago you couldn't do. And now you can do again and again and again until you get it absolutely perfect. It's genuinely amazing what you can do there. And I've worked with a number of organizations as they've thought through how they want to explain things to their client or to a judge or to a jury, and they found that using these tools is tremendously helpful. So from a terminology standpoint, there's really only two things that I talk about anymore. And the first one, which is really important, is called the context window. And it's funny, I wish I could see everybody on video and have a raise of hands, because I'd love to know who's using these different tools and what you know about these things. But I'm going to talk about the context window, and I'm still going to talk about hallucinations, which is still a challenge. But effectively, a context window is a large language model, or LLM's, short-term memory, right? How long of a conversation can you have with one of these tools before it forget things? So if you started using these tools 2 or 3 years ago, you would have a conversation, you go back and forth, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, and it would start to forget the beginning of the conversation. It wouldn't know what file you uploaded. It wouldn't know what you said about the beginning of a case. And these have continued to improve again and again and again. They still do have limits, and I'll talk about the limits in a second. But, think about it as, a desk. You can only put so many pieces of paper on it, without covering things up, right? That's how the short-term memory works. And it really has improved pretty dramatically over time. And the way I like to explain it, instead of giving you, the exact, number of tokens you can have in a context window, I like to think about pages of text. And so most people have read a Harry Potter book or seen a Harry Potter book. And the average Harry Potter book is just under 500 pages long. It's about 487 pages long. And so if you're using ChatGPT, you can actually have a conversation that's approximately 1.5 Harry Potter books long, right? So it can be about 770 pages of data, right? It's a pretty extensive conversation. Claude's latest models, the Anthropic models, can have just over 1 Harry Potter book, right? It can hold about 600 standard pages of text, right? And this includes, the uploads, if you're uploading memos and declarations and depositions and exhibits and judgments, right? So you think about all the pages, all the text, that's about how much it can handle. And then Gemini can hold about 3,000 pages of text, right? So it can hold about almost the entire series of the Harry Potter books. So depending on what you're trying to do, these tools bring different capabilities to the table, right? And this is just the length of the conversation. They have different capabilities in terms of, their ability to do spreadsheet analysis and update, Microsoft Word documents and things like that. So it really does change pretty dramatically. It looks, by the way, like my video froze. So I'm going to just sort of quickly undo my video and restart my video. Give me 1 second, see if that resets it here. Nope. So I guess I will go off it for a few minutes. I'll turn off the camera and see if that makes a difference, but I'll just keep going here. So the other thing I want to mention from a technology standpoint is hallucinations. And I know that most people have heard about hallucinations. And really what it is when one of these large language models will confidently tell you something that is completely false, right? And I think the analogy that's in the middle here is great. So, imagine you hired someone that is absolutely brilliant, well-read, and articulate. They've read absolutely everything that's out there on the internet. They've seen it. They've trained on it. They know everything that's out there. And their biggest flaw is the ability to go say no. They just cannot say no, right? And in many ways, that's what these large language models are doing. They've been trained to please you, to make you happy, and to try and give you an answer. So even if it doesn't exactly know the answer, it will do its best to, to make one up, to give you one. So I will say the tools have gotten tremendously better in the last couple of years in terms of hallucinations. And now we're down to, in many cases, when you use these advanced models, single digit hallucination rates, but these tools can still make things up. So I just would encourage you, please be careful when you use them. And we'll talk about, the role of human review and things like that at the end of this process. So I mentioned earlier infographics. And this is a different version of the slide I was going to start with. And, the prompt I use, I said, look, I'm presenting to a bunch of family law lawyers. This can be the opening provocative question on a slide. Can you present this content on a slide that would be professional and super interesting, getting people's attention? And then here's the quote I want you to use. And I was originally going to do it in the style of the golden age of air travel. So I'm going to grab this quote because I want to show you Google Gemini here. And if you haven't used Gemini, it's another tool like ChatGPT or Claude. And when you come in here in the tool section, there's a thing here that says create image. And I'm just going to paste in this prompt here, just as I had it there. And I'm going to say go. And in about 30 seconds or less, we're actually, and you can see here, it's loading a tool called Nano Banana. It's figuring out what it's going to put in that image. And then it will actually go ahead and create this image for us. And so while we let this run here, I'm just going to see if I can get the video restarted again, but it seems to not be happy today. So it's got to be the 90-degree weather here in Westlake Village. But we'll let this run for a second. Crafting the content structure, thinking, here's a mini background and concept, right? So it went and actually created an image. Now, interestingly, it did not create the text I asked it for. And so if it didn't do it, I would tell it, hey, go do this again, right? And make it happen. So I could change the style, I can do things. And that's one thing, when these tools hallucinate, they can still make mistakes. It's actually funny. This is probably the first time I've generated one of these where it didn't do what I asked it to do. But you will see that when you play with these tools that most of the time they are very, very, very good, but occasionally that they do make mistakes. So I want to go into some specific family law examples here. And I use a number of these examples at the keynote presentation. So take a look at the slide. So the financial declaration inconsistency detector. And so the problem is, opposing parties will routinely understate income and overstate expenses. So catching inconsistencies requires cross-referencing tax returns, bank statements, lifestyle evidence, which can take hours, right? You may assign a paralegal or a second-year assistant to go work on this because you may have dozens or hundreds of documents. And so in the next couple of pages, I'm going to show you a number of examples. I'm actually not going to go through each of the examples line by line, but I do want to actually explain this one in a little more detail because I think what's really important here is the prompts. And so if you look at the prompt here, analyze the opposing party's financial documents for inconsistencies and hidden income. I'm going to provide a bunch of documents and I will upload these into the chats here, right? Income and expense declarations, tax returns, bank statements, pay stubs. Information about their known lifestyle, right? Home values, rents, vehicles, children's schools, recent vacations. And then I'm going to tell the LLM what I want it to do. I want it to look for income discrepancies, right? I wanted to compare the W-2s and the 1099s against the declared income, identify if there's unreported Schedule C or K-1 income, and then calculate average annual or average monthly income, right? I wanted to look for expense discrepancies, right? Compare declared expenses to actual bank and credit card spending, identify understated categories, right? Let's look at the lifestyle gap. Does declared income support their apparent lifestyle? Calculate the gap between spending and declared income. Red flags, right? Are there transfers to unknown accounts? Are there round number deposits not matching paychecks? Are there missing accounts? So I tried to give it enough detail in this prompt to actually go through and figure out, what should be actually in this tool here. So I'm going to grab this prompt. I'm going to go here and I'm actually going to go launch it in all the LLMs because I want you to see what the output looks like here. So I'm going to go add some files here. I'm going to go to number 1. I'm going to grab these different examples here. I'm going to then paste this prompt in and I'm going to tell it to go ahead and go. I'm going to go do the same thing in ChatGPT. And so one thing I want to highlight, and this is super, super important, especially if you or your organization is using ChatGPT, you get a choice of models. You also do in Claude and you get a choice of models in Gemini as well. But you'll notice there's an auto model, there's an instant model, there's thinking, there's pro, and depending on your subscription, you may have legacy models as well. On this one, I have turned this to the thinking model. And when you select thinking in this little drop down here, you get choices. If you have a business subscription, you'll probably see just standard and extended. I've got a more advanced one, so I get a couple of others as well. But one of the things that I would ask you to take away is when you are using these tools, use these reasoning models, use these thinking models. It is one of the most important things you can do because you get dramatically better output. If you choose auto on here and you paste in a prompt and you give it information, what ChatGPT does is it goes to basically the least powerful model that it thinks it can use to answer your question. It doesn't do advanced reasoning. It doesn't do complex thinking. It really says, okay, they want something fast. I'm going to give them, a very fast, quick answer. So, and the same thing when you're using Opus here. There's different models. There's Opus 4.6 and there's Sonnet. There's just different versions of it. I always use Opus 4.6, which is their most advanced model, and I turn on extended thinking. And if you're using Gemini, it's the same thing. They have different models. They have basically fast, they have thinking, and then they have pro. Again, if you take away nothing, please always use those most advanced models here. I'm going to actually do the same thing. I'm going to upload them all because I want you to be able to see what the output looks like here because they do provide actual very different structures, very different outputs. The challenge will be with ChatGPT here is the latest version of ChatGPT is extraordinarily comprehensive, and it's also very, very slow. So I'm going to let this run for a second. What I want to show you is I've got the completed output over here. So I actually ran Claude's version earlier. And one of the things that actually makes Claude really interesting is it works exceptionally well in Word documents and Excel documents and PowerPoint documents. So, I literally took the same prompt in here and it actually created for me a Word document that I could download now in a great format. So here's the executive summary, the total monthly income, the declared and the actual, monthly income understatement, monthly expense understatement, right? So here's all the sections, the income discrepancies, right? And you can see, particularly in this version, it's very, very nicely formatted, right? It creates color-coded tables. It does all these different things. So it actually becomes a really nice way of doing this and making this happen. So let me scroll down a little bit further here. There's the key income red flags, right? There's expense discrepancies over here. There's a lifestyle gap analysis, the red flag summary. So again, a very comprehensive, really well formatted output that makes it easy to answer the question you want to focus on. They even give a nice table at the end here. So let me see if I can get video back on for 1 second here. I don't know if it is going to work. Nope, apparently it is not going to work. So can everybody still hear me, or can someone let me just confirm that you can see me and hear me?
We can still see you and hear you.
Oh, okay, that's great. I can't see it on my side, so something's going on with Zoom. Thank you. So the next one, and by the way, I have not been looking in the chat. Have there been any questions that have shown up, or are we good on questions?
So far, no questions. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I'm going to just try the video one more time. It's really being weird. Okay, so this next one is domestic violence restraining orders, right? So I'll simply read the problem again. Actually, let me go back to, so Claude reran this. I did a different version of it. It created the charts. ChatGPT, so here's its way of doing it, right? The declared versus actual. So it came to the same answers, right? But I don't think that the formatting here is just as nicely polished as it is in that Claude example that I gave you, where I basically, have it do word structures. But you can see it has all the sections, it has all the pieces, and Gemini does the same thing. Again, it's much more text-based. So one of the things you'll notice in a lot of these examples is that it really does a pretty impressive job of actually, Claude in particular, of formatting things. But whichever tool you use, you will actually get, the kind of output that you're looking for in doing this. So let me talk about the DVRO example for a minute. So again, they require specific detailed allegations, meeting legal standards. The victims can share information in very fragmented ways. You as an attorney have to organize it into compelling, legally sufficient declarations. So I'm going to grab the prompt again. I'm not going to read it, right? But we're going to ask it to create a declaration, an incident table, a request checklist, and safety flags. And again, I'm just going to launch it in all of them. And while they're running, I'll just launch it in ChatGPT here again. And then I will launch it in Gemini just so you can see it, because I've already got the Claude one pre-done, so I can show you that while these run in the background here. So let's get that prompt in. Let's say go. Let's go here. Let's get these files in. And let's say go for this. And so I'm going to come over here while those are running and come to Claude. And so again, you can see same files, same prompts. And this one again formatted a very, very nicely done document, right? Superior Court of California, right? Here's the petitioner, here's the respondent. Here's the safety flag section and emergency orders request, right? Immediate danger indicators, right? Recommendation grant an emergency ex parte orders immediately, right? Declaration of the petitioner, incidents of abuse. So again, I'm not going to read it, and you don't need to read it, but I'm just trying to show you sort of the quality of the thinking, the quality of the output to jumpstart what you're focused on. And again, I would never take these and just turn these into a court, right? Use these as a starting point to go verify the information, to check the information, and make sure that everything that's in there makes sense. So here is ChatGPT's version, right? Here's the DVRO, here's the upfront piece, the declaration of the petitioner, most recent incidents, right? So again, all the content's there. To me, it's more of a formatting issue. I just happen to like the way that Claude outputs it. And here's the same thing in Gemini, right? Again, you have all that level of content. You've got the thinking, you've got an incident table. So depending on the environment you're in, the structure you're in, right? It just gives you a great way to do it. But one of the things to take away is, I think you probably all have the presentation already, but just take a look at the prompts, because you can put in far more complex prompts now than you could, 6 months ago, a year ago. And they have a large enough context window, and they're really good at following instructions that you can go through piece by piece and allow it to go do that. So I'll do two more in the structure. So this one is a property characterization analyzer, right? Determining community versus separate property requires, tracing transmutations and commingling, through years of documents, right? Missing arguments and cost clients hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So we want to, analyze the property characterization for these assets, right? Initially, we want to do an initial characterization. We want to do transmutation. We want to look at commingling. We want to look at reimbursement claims, if there's any special rules and evidence needed. So I will again grab this prompt here, because I always think it's important to sort of see how these tools work and see what the output looks like. So let's go grab this one. I'm going to paste that in there and let that run. We'll go do the same thing with Gemini. And by the way, I'm going to do a second example here. I'm going to show you something else. Let me go grab this. Yeah, this is property characterization. Paste in the prompt. And I just want to show you, if I had run this on ChatGPT Auto, I want to show you the difference in, oh, that's why these were so fast. These were running on Auto. I was like, let me put in what I said I was doing, thinking. Like, these were going remarkably fast for the way this normally works. So thinking, if I go do this now, will give me a much more detailed answer than the other one. So, okay, question that's in here. What is the cost, if any, for using these different LLMs? So I'm going to come, it's a great question, Dan. I'm going to come to a question on privacy in a little bit, because it used to be that you could, or people were using sort of the consumer-based versions of the tools, which were $20 a month, and then they were sort of turning off training. There, the Heppner ruling in the Southern District of New York, and a bunch of the, the ABA rules coming down are basically saying you really can't get privilege and protection using the consumer tools. You've got to use Teams or enterprise ones. So for ChatGPT, in order to get they call it a business subscription, right, which actually gives you complete privacy. They don't train in your data. Third-party people can't access it. It's a minimum of 2 licenses per month, and it's $25 a license, so it's $50 a month to get access to ChatGPT. For Gemini, I think it's $20 a month for a workspace edition that you can use. And for Claude, they have a minimum of 5 licenses per month that you've got to get the first version of Teams at $30 a month. So it's $150. So the most expensive one, which is Claude, is $150 a month. And, then $50 for ChatGPT, and basically $20 for Gemini. Let me just see how these are looking for a second here. So Gemini has gone through, it did the analysis here. I'll show you what the Claude one looks like here, right? Here's the property characterization analysis, right? Here's the assets, here's the key dates on it, right? Initial characterization of it, right? Premarital acquisition, title at acquisition, separate property down payment, pre-marriage mortgage payments, right? So it just goes through and it goes through all the section by section analysis, commingling and tracing analysis, right? The Moore Marston reimbursement calculation is done in here, right? Community improvements claim. So it goes through all the kinds of things that you would want to look at. And again, you'd want to verify the stuff, but it gives you a tremendously good start in doing this analysis. And so, Gemini went through and did, similar, but I don't think quite as detailed of work. And ChatGPT here, extended thinking, this is where I said it takes a long time. It's going to go do a ton of research, and this will probably take 5 minutes to run. But again, you'll get a very detailed answer. I apologize. I didn't realize I was using auto earlier in these examples because I typically don't use auto. And again, I would encourage you not to use auto as you go through it. The next question was, how do you introduce this analysis to the court? How do you lay the foundation? Usually the court might expect an expert witness. Do these entities qualify as expert witnesses? How do you cross-examine them? Well, they're not expert witnesses, right? It's sort of like you used, someone on your team or a very smart person helping you do the analysis and do the math. So that's more of a question of how you want to approach the court. I know that some of the attorneys I've worked with have basically said, look, we have actually used large language models to do this initial analysis. We then went through and double checked and vetted all the numbers and cross-checked everything. And so they were doing it themselves. A lot of times they're not using the expert analyses or expert witnesses that they would have used in the past, but it really is going to be, on a case-by-case basis and depending on how you want to structure it and what you want to do there. Let me just see. Okay, so ChatGPT is done. So you can see this one, if you compare it to the original auto one, right? So here was the original one it did when you just sort of use the auto thinking, not a very detailed answer, right? When you use the extended thinking here, you get much more detailed answers. You get, references, you get outside, sources and things like that. And you can just see it's still working. It's providing more detail, more insight. And like I said, Claude for me though, really is becoming the gold standard for the level of output that it's creating. So just one more example like this. The business valuation discovery strategist, right? So, valuing a spouse's business requires extensive discovery that business owners resist. Knowing what to request and why requires forensic accounting, right? And so here's an example where I actually was talking to some of the folks at the AAML keynote, and we were talking about the impact, for example, on forensic accountants, right? Because a lot of times they will take a lot of the data you've taken, they'll transcribe into other things. And these tools now can actually take PDFs and spreadsheets or anything and actually convert it into formats that they can use, right? They don't need to do the data entry that they used to have to do. So there are some opportunities for time savings and expense savings and things like that. But we want to develop a business valuation discovery strategy, right? We're going to do document requests, key interrogatories, deposition outlines. So again, I'll go run this. This time I will change the model. So we get back in thinking mode here, which we are. Let me grab this. Let me go grab the examples here. We'll load those up and fire this off as soon as it's ready. That one's off. Let's go do the same thing here in Gemini. And while that's off and running, I'll just pull up the Claude one because, it's already run and it does a really good example, right? So again, the business valuation discovery strategy document, right? In the marriage of 10, again, here's the executive summary, right? It's analyzing the business, information about, the industry, the owner, right? Revenue, owner compensation, right? Some of the suspected issues that we've got, personal expenses run through the business, revenue suppression post-separation, right? So it went through and it did the analysis to start to identify, what are some of these other issues? What are the things that we care about that are important to do here, right? So document requests that should be made, right? Financial statements, right? Red flags we've already identified, right? Business development and meals, right? That's quite the jump from 18,000 to 72,000 in 2023 to 2024. So again, these large language models are just amazing in helping you find these things and doing these things, right? Bank statements, cash deposits versus reported revenue, right? Timing of deposits, transfers. So again, I won't go through this whole thing, but I just wanted to show you an example of the kind of content that it can create with the right kind of prompting, right? And learning to do the right kind of prompting does take time. So you can see this is going through here. It's actually going to create the same sections, right? Document requests, corporate tax and accounting files, get the full 1120S package, including all these schedules, right? Compensation, payroll. And Gemini is also doing, the same thing. But again, to me, it's just it's not as detailed, even though it's using its most advanced pro model, and same thing with Claude and with ChatGPT. So this is a really unique example. And every time I show this example to people, it really shows you the power of where these tools are going. So Claude introduced a tool called Claude Cowork. They had something called Claude Code, which was originally built for developers. And the thing that's different is right now, like when you see me go into one of these tools and I do a new chat, right? I have to upload files, in here. And there's a limit, you can have 10 or 15 or 20 files uploaded depending on which tool you're using. But Claude Cowork is part of the Claude application you get if you subscribe to Claude. And what's unique about it is you can actually point it at a directory on your computer and have it operate on 10, 50, 100, 1,000 files in that directory. So if you're looking to operate and analyze a lot of things, this is a really great tool. And I'm going to show you exactly how this works. So the example is, in an upcoming divorce, you might get hundreds of financial documents, right? You get them in bulk. They might be in a single PDF. They might get other things. But you've probably got a paralegal or an assistant or an associate whose job is to go through those, understand what's in every file, categorize them, name them, put the Bates numbers in, create an index. And so what you'll see here is I've developed a prompt that says, look, there are 100 financial documents in here. I want you to open up every one and analyze it and tell me what it is, right? Is it a bank statement? Is it a credit card statement? Is it a tax return? Right? Once you know what it is, I want you to rename it using this format, right? So a 5-character case code, the date in, year, month, day, the type and the vendor. So for example, Sterling, the date 26, 113, credit card statement, Southwest Visa, right? So this is the case code is Sterling. I also wanted to create a subdirectory, a new directory called categorize, because I don't want to touch the original files, right? I wanted to make copies and change things. I said, analyze every file, identify it. If it's not in a PDF format already, I want you to convert it to PDF, and I want you to apply sequential Bates numbers starting at, Smith 0001 in the bottom right corner of each page, maintaining sequences across all documents in alphabetical order. Once it's done, I want you to create an index of the new file names, right? And the old ones and the Bates numbers, and do not delete any original files, right? So again, I've actually done this demo live for a bunch of organizations. I'm actually going to switch the sharing here to share a different window on my screen. Let me share my Claude Code window here. And I'm going to go in here. And so you'll see in Claude Code, there is a thing here called Cowork up in the top. And so I'm going to go point at a particular folder. So I'm going to choose a different folder here. I'm going to go into this folder, and then I'm going to go into financial statements here. I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to say, go ahead and always allow. And I'm just going to paste this prompt in here, and I'm going to say, go. And it'll probably take 2 minutes. So what we'll do is we're going to come back to it in a minute, because I do want to show you the output, and I want to show you what it's doing. But what it'll do here is it's going to think about what are all the steps I've asked it to do. And it will actually, it'll read its skills. It'll start to understand how it can read, PDFs and text files and Word documents and things like that. And then it's going to create a series of steps. And so it's going to build a plan, and it's going to go execute on its own to go through every file in that directory, figure out, how to analyze it, figure out how to make it a PDF, put the Bates numbers in, and then ultimately at the end, create, a highly polished Word document. So like I said, this will take like 2 minutes, and we'll come back and I'll show you everything on the screen. But I wanted to make you aware of the power of these tools. And this is something that they launched about maybe 6 weeks ago. And it has just opened up a world of use cases for people to focus on and to do. So I'm going to stop sharing this. And like I said, I will come back to that in a minute here. But let me go back to the presentation. And I've got 2 other examples I want to show you. So one really great example here is doing language translation from a page, right? And so one of the challenges that a lot of people have is trying to figure out what is, on a document here. And if I zoom in, if I make this a little bit bigger, let me see if I can make this image bigger here. There we go. Right. This is a doctor's note from a different country. There's a lot of information on there. For me personally, it would actually be very hard to read and digest what's on that. These tools are amazing at understanding and translating languages and understanding what's on images and things like that. And so I'm going to grab this image here. I'm going to grab this prompt that says, attaches a doctor's note that is relevant to a divorce case I'm working on. It's from a doctor in the Philippines. It has a combination of languages. Give me a detailed description and translation for this image. So again, I'm going to grab this. This is one where Gemini is exceptional. So one of the strengths of Gemini is it was trained as what's called a multimodal tool. It was built from the ground up to understand video and audio and and video, audio, and images. And it really can go through and understand what's in all this. I'm actually going to say, put the output in a nicely formatted table. One of the examples I didn't pull up, but I'm happy to pull it up if we have time at the end, is I don't know how many of you actually have video depositions that you have to deal with, but you can actually upload up to multiple hours of video, and Gemini they have a tool called AI Studio, can actually understand truly what's happening in that video. So not only could you upload a video and it could actually give you, a perfect, audio file of it, it could actually give you a perfect, written transcript of it. It could convert it into different languages. But most importantly, you could actually ask it, at what point in that video did that person get angry or sad, or at what point did they do this? Because it actually knows what's happening in the video versus just, what is, like a simple text translation. So it's the only tool out there that natively understands it. So if you're working with, video depositions, happy to spend time with people and show you what you can do. But look, you can see how quickly this translated this note, right? So here's the header, here's the physician, where the location is, here's the patient, here's all the information about them, here's their vitals, here's what it means, right? So, you might have had to have passed that off to, an expert. You can actually drop these things into these tools now. These things can process, hundreds of pages of, of medical documents. Please, use the Teams or the enterprise ones. Don't use a consumer one if you're putting in PII, because that is not protected. But you can get, BAAs and HIPAA compliance with most of these tools now. So you can start to do lots of analysis that you couldn't do before. But this was a great example of, of what you can do. So, all right. So the other tool is done. I'm going to stop sharing this and just go back to Claude for a second here. So let me go back into Claude. And so what it did is it said, I have a clear picture of all the 100 files. There were 47 bank statements. There were 48 credit card statements, right? All 100 PDFs, were created with the Bates stamps, right? And I've now created this Word document file here. So I'll open up the Word document just as an example. And what you'll see here is, we'll see the old file name, the new file name, right? So it did 47 bank statements, right? How many Bates pages it did, right? So here you can see, right? So here's the Bates number on it, right? It was a credit card statement. Here's the date. Here was the vendor. Here was the original file name. And then I had it move it into a new file, right? So it was a text file, and now it's a PDF file, right? Called Sterling 2025-0109 credit card statement Amex.pdf. And that document has the Bates numbers in it as well, right? It has these Bates numbers. So again, a terrific example of how you can use these tools, right? Again, this didn't even exist 6 weeks ago. So these things are moving fast and lets you really start to analyze and do things that you just couldn't easily do before in these tools. Let me just see if I can get, nope, it is just not going to do the camera today. That's too bad. So I'll turn that back off, and I'll go back to sharing my screen to wrap up the presentation. So one other example in here, and I'll show you a couple of other tools, is another great use case for these tools is they are amazing at extracting information out of financial statements. So if, for example, you have a tax return, or you have a 10Q from a client or a 10K from a client, right, depending on the company you're analyzing, and you want to take that information out there and put it in a spreadsheet, right? Or you want to just put it in a table, you can actually give it the instructions to say, hey, look, you're an AI assisted task, you're an AI assistant tasked with extracting key financial information, out of this document, right? Here's a company's 10K. I want you to identify and extract the following things, right? Past 3 years, EBITDA, revenue growth rate, net income, right? Find the relevant sections. And what's interesting is if a metric isn't explicitly in there, you can have it do calculations, right? So I can tell it, hey, EBITDA is operating income plus depreciation and amortization. So if it's not in there, it will go ahead and do this. So I'm going to grab this prompt, and I'm going to go run it in all of these. And this is one where this one I just happen to know from having done this a million times. It doesn't need the most advanced models to go extract, numeric information out of a 10K spreadsheet here. So I'm going to go run these, and I'm going to run this one on auto. I'm going to add this file into here as well. Drop this prompt in here. Come on, ChatGPT, catch up. And while that's going, we'll do the same thing here in Gemini. Go to the 10K. Let's Control V this in here. And let's see if ChatGPT is now ready to run as well. And so this will take a second. And the thing about Claude, even in Sonnet, it's going to actually turn this into an actual spreadsheet. So its default now for the way that I happen to use Claude tools is anytime I ask for text content, it basically tries to put it in a Word document. And if I ask for financial content, it tries to put it in in an Excel file. So this is working through this, and Gemini's working through this. So we'll give them a second to work through. While those are all working, I do want to show you another really amazing tool that is out there. And I don't know how many of you use the Google Suites of tools. About a year and a half ago, they introduced an amazing tool called Notebook LM. And Notebook LM is one of the few tools from Google that actually from day one, they committed to being private on, right? And again, I would only use the teams or the enterprise versions of this tool. Please don't use the consumer one, even though they promise privacy. I just, as a best practice, I would definitely not do that. But what Notebook LM is Notebook LM lets you create these individual notebooks. And what's unique about them is, if you're using ChatGPT or Claude and you're in a project, you can upload at most maybe, 15 or 20 documents at one time. But oftentimes, you may have dozens or hundreds. When you create one of these workbooks, you can put up to 500 different documents in any one workbook. And so what you'll see here is, the depositions, right? So I did this funny one. I'm a big dog owner. When my video was working, you probably saw a St. Bernard photo over my shoulder here. I did these depositions of dogs. And what's unique about Notebook LM is, like I said, you can have up to 500, documents. You can have, Word docs, PDFs, text files, YouTube links, CSV files, all sorts of stuff. But if you ask a question, right? I mean, I asked last time how many St. Bernards were interviewed. I'll ask, how many dachshunds were interviewed. And I don't think I typed, let's get rid of the how many dachshunds were interviewed. What makes this unique is it only goes to the source data that you had in there. So it doesn't go to any of its training data on the internet. So if you have a large repository, let's say you've got, 100 documents from a case you're working on, right? You've got, all the depositions, you've got all the declarations, you've got, all the judgments that are in there, and you want to just ask questions about that content. This is the one tool that you can upload, like I said, up to 500, documents. And each one of these notebooks, by the way, can hold 25 million pages of text, right? Or sorry, 25 million words, right? Which is an astonishing, it's millions of pages of text, right? It's absolutely incredible. So you can see here, it says, hey, based on all these sources, and I have 300 files in here, right? There were 7 dachshunds interviewed, right? Abby, Lucy, Lola, Maggie, Bentley, Ivy, and Nova, right? And it gave me a brief. And the nice thing is when you ask it a question, if you hover over it here, like you hover over the number, it gives me the summary of the text that it's pulling from. So if you had a bunch of documents, you're trying to find a particular quote or an example, you can hover over it, you can see it. If I then click on it, it will actually open up that document over here and highlight the exact text that it's pulling from. So again, a super, super powerful tool for doing this. The other things that they added into Notebook LM, which were amazing, is they added these cinematic overviews, which I'll show you in a second, but they actually allowed you to create infographics. So from a single line, remember I showed you that Sterling divorce case settlement in the beginning? That was an infographic. This is an infographic from these contents, right? I said, create an infographic about, the dog's life quality report, right? And it was based on 300 sources. It created this entire thing. It actually can create an entire presentation, again, based on the content you put in there. I don't know how often you need to, create PowerPoint presentations or other presentations to either explain to a client or explain to a judge something that's going on, but you can drop content in here now and actually create presentations from this. And you can create podcasts, and I'll just show you, they introduced something called cinematic overviews. And hopefully I turned, let me stop share for a second. I just want to make sure that for this, I turn the sound on. It is on. And whoop, hold on. I don't need to share my whole screen. I want to share this window again and make sure sound's on because I want you to hear it. So it'll actually create basically mini movies now of things that are in there. So I'm just going to hit play for 30 seconds here.
We tend to think of the modern dog's life as a single
Whoop, it's being slow.
shared utopia, an assumed baseline of
That is really slow today. I apologize. So it's normally what it does is it goes through there and it will, I'll try and load it one more time really quickly here, see if it can load up.
We tend to think of the modern dog's life as a single shared utopia, an assumed baseline of endless frisbee catches, treats, and sleeping at the foot of the bed in a loving home. To find out what is actually happening,
So again, it takes content, creates interactive slides and video, and I've seen some absolutely unbelievable examples of what that's doing there. So I want to go back to the prior example, the extractions for a second here. So you'll see here, here's what Claude created, right? So Claude created actually a very nicely formatted table for me, right? Here's the metrics, here's the years, here's a chart for it. So again, it did an amazing job of extracting out all the information that I asked it to do, formatted it in a great way. ChatGPT, same thing. It has all the relevant information and even gave me a formula here about how things were created and gave me the core data, some key insights, and Gemini will actually do the same thing. So all these tools are amazing at extracting that information out and doing things like that. So again, super powerful use cases and very, very easy to go do that. But just to wrap up on Notebook LM, the last thing that they did that was also really interesting, what made them famous in the beginning was the ability to create these podcasts. And so I actually know a number of attorneys that they're dumping in all the latest case information and they're saying, hey, create me a podcast so I can actually get up to speed and listen to this, as I'm driving to work, as I'm doing these different things. So I'm just going to hit play on this one for a second too. We'll see if Google can load it for us.
Over
here.
their head. It's
Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission today is a bit of an unusual one.
It really is.
We're sifting through what are being...
Isn't just about food and a roof over their head. It's about shared purpose.
Right.
The data shows this.
So anyways, these two podcasters will have an extraordinarily detailed conversation about the content that you loaded in there. And it is super, super interesting and super useful. So a couple of other things. ChatGPT and Claude have something called projects. And if you're using ChatGPT or Claude, I would strongly encourage you to use projects and create projects. And let me show you why. So a project is a dedicated workspace in ChatGPT or Claude where you can upload a set of files. Say you've got a dedicated set of case files, and then you can have a number of questions on those files without having to re-upload those all the time. So I can go in, if I go into Claude here, and I have a series of projects already that I've got, right? I've got, headlines and writing style stuff and commercial leasing examples and all sorts of things like that and family law ones. But I just want to show you. So I'm going to create a new project and I'm going to say, hey, this is project client X. I'm going to create this project. And so what's really useful here is, so the memory, so this is the personal version that I'm showing versus I've got a corporate version, but I have client work in there. So I never show that when I'm doing these webcasts. So the memory is only for me, but I can give it instructions. I can tell it how I want it to talk, how I want it to do analysis and things like that. But the beauty is in files here, I can go add files. So if I went in here and if I go back to, I'll just go back to these business valuation files here, and I'm going to go ahead and say open. And I'm going to just say, so even though that has those 7 files in there, I'm only using 2% of the project capacity here. It actually allows you to upload lots and lots of files. So if you got big cases, this is the place to do it. You can put them in there. And now every question I have, summarize the files I've uploaded, just as a really simple query here, right? When you're in this project, every time you ask it a question, you don't have to re-upload all those files. And then every additional conversation you have in this project, it actually has knowledge of all the other conversations you've had. So if you've been thinking about arguments or if you've been, trying to make a case for a certain point of view, you don't have to have a single thread in there, right? You could actually have 10 different conversations. And then again, these projects have knowledge of the other conversations that are in there. So if I went into projects, if I go back into Client X now, you'll see this was that very first question I asked. And I could even ask it, hey, what did I ask in the past? Right. And it has knowledge of, the kinds of things that you've done. Right. So it's going to look through the relevant chats in this project and saying, hey, you asked me to summarize the files you uploaded. So again, if you've made arguments, if you're making claims, this is a great way to have a very contained version for a particular client. And again, super useful. ChatGPT does the same thing. Super, super powerful and a great use case. And I would encourage you to use those. I want to talk really briefly about prompting. We've got 10 minutes left and I've only got a small handful of slides I want to share left. But look, prompting, as you can see from the prompts that I've given you, is a journey, right? And you want to think about these tools as having having a conversation with them, right? It's not give it one prompt and get the best answer. Think of it again as like, having a second year associate, and you give them some direction, they come back with something, you review it, say, oh, hey, that was good, but focus on this or change this or do that, right? Make these things collaborative, right? And the examples that I use to people are, first of all, be very specific and clear. So you saw from the prompts I was giving, I was telling it exactly what I wanted, right? If you have content and examples, you can upload well-written arguments or a great set of interrogatories and say, structure it like this or learn from this. Break down complex tasks. Don't try and tell it to do 15 things. Say, hey, do this as step one, do this as step two, do this as step three. Get these 3 things done, do them very well. Then let's go on to steps 4, 5, and 6. You can specify the format. You can say, I want you to have this in a narrative output. I want this in, Blue Book citation file style. I want you to have this in tables or as a spreadsheet. I want this in bulleted output. It will put the output any way you want it. You can have it be extremely verbose. You can have it be very, very short. So tell it what you're looking for. If you have constraints, if you want to only go to a certain set of case law, or you only want it to look at cases, in a certain jurisdiction, tell it that. It's very good at following your directions. I mentioned earlier, iterate and refine. And then lastly, use system-specific features. Actually, I'll show you the simple formula I use. So I call it RTDF, role, task, details, format, right? So role and context, define the role that you want the large language model to be. So for example, I'm a senior partner at a family law firm, and it will then act and think as if it's a senior partner at a family law firm, or it will do its best to do that and frame questions and do things that way. I will give it a task list. What do I want it to do? List out the very specific tasks that you want the LLM to do, what details to include or to exclude, and then what is the format of the output? Is it narrative? It's bullet? Is it first person? Is it third person? What's the style of writing I want you to do? Things like that. It doesn't matter. So one other thing I want to mention, and I forgot to show this earlier, and I'll show it in Gemini, is all these tools have added something called canvas mode, or in Claude, they call it artifact mode. But what it lets you do, and I'm going to do a fast version here. Let me just start this. Hey, Gemini, create a 3-paragraph story about the history of St. Bernard's. What Canvas mode does is it lets you work in a document as if you're actually in a document. So normally, if you've used ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, you know that you type a prompt in, you get an answer. You type a prompt in, you get an answer, and it rewrites everything. Well, if you implement Canvas mode, and if you're here, right, you'll see here in more, there's Canvas mode here, same thing. And in Claude, it actually has a thing. It's actually, if you just tell it to use this artifact window, it will actually create it as an artifact. But what it lets you do is it'll actually create this over here, and I can highlight it, and I can say, hey, ask Gemini. So I can now actually have it operate just on that one portion of text. So I could say, hey, rewrite this section for a kindergarten audience. Right. And so instead of actually rewriting the entire document, it's going to simply rewrite that one paragraph. So if you're working on a long memo or a brief, and you just want to change one thing, all of them have this mode. Like I said, Claude's is artifacts, ChatGPT and Gemini is canvas. It is a fantastic way to be able to edit. And then you can go back, you can see history, you can unwind, you can track changes. There's edit tools over here. So again, I don't have time to show it all to you. Play with it. The only thing I'll mention here, because I don't want to spend time here because we've only got a few minutes left, is these models are the dumbest that they're ever going to be, and they're already unbelievably smart, even compared to a year ago, 18 months ago. This is probably my favorite benchmark to go look at. It's called the Artificial Analysis Intelligence Index. And what they've done is they've incorporated 10 different major evaluations, right? So they went out to PhD level folks and said, okay, I'm going to go look at all these different questions. I'm going to incorporate this input and give these large language models questions that aren't out there on the internet, so they couldn't train on them, right? To see how smart they are. And basically what this says now is the smartest models today, which are, Gemini 3.1 Pro, which is Google's model, and ChatGPT 5.4, can answer 57% of PhD level questions. And by the way, the benchmark is that the typical human would be able to answer 0, right? Because again, these are meant to be the most advanced questions in science and in physics and in chemistry and in biology and math and things like that, and coding and reasoning. So It's these models, they get smarter all the time. That doesn't mean they're smart at everything they do, but they are incredibly smart. So, two last pages. One, I do want to talk about responsibility. And probably the single most important thing I can say, and I say this in every presentation now, is the text next to the gavel here, right? Human review after final AI modification, not before. It doesn't matter how good your prompt is, it doesn't matter how good my prompt is. These things can still make mistakes, right? They can cite a fictitious case, they can mix up an argument. So before you stand in front of a judge, before you stand in front of the client and give them something, you have to review it. If you take away nothing else, please do that. And what I tell people is, look, the AI does not have a bar number. It will not stand before a judge if there's this, if there's a fabricated citation. It does not have a reputation. It has no malpractice insurance. It has no career built on helping clients and doing things. You have all those things. Please, please, please do that. And oh shoot, I skipped this page. I didn't want to skip this page. Privacy. A year ago, 18 months ago, everybody was playing with the consumer tools, the $20 ones. And in theory, you can have it turn off training. However, third parties in the right circumstances can still access that data. So you absolutely do not have privilege if you're using consumer tools. Please, please, please only use the Teams or the enterprise tools, right? For ChatGPT, it starts at $50 a month to get it. Data is guaranteed not to be used as training. Data is encrypted, and you get a ton of control. Data it's encrypted at transit and at rest. Humans cannot review the data. With Claude, it's a minimum 150 a month. With Google, it's $20 a month to do that stuff, right? So it's not materially more expensive than using the consumer ones, but you get wildly better controls. In fact, you get a lot of these privacy things as well in the Teams one. I just didn't list it out there, but please, please, please do not use the consumer ones. Lastly, if you're working at a firm and you're trying to think about, what your strategy should be as to how you adopt AI, right? Start with the business value, not the tools. What are you actually trying to do with these tools? Are you trying to do drafting or review client documents, right? Or give client updates? So think about the process, right? Set clear boundaries, redesign your workflows, assign ownership of it and measure outcomes. And then just the last thing I'll say, if you're looking for help on these things, I work with firms all the time. I do much longer versions of this. I do executive workshops with organizations that are about 2.5 hours that help you understand what you're really trying to do with these tools, how to really use these tools. Some people want firm-wide training, and I happily will do that. And for a few organizations, I will do AI case support. If you have very advanced cases and you need, the most powerful capabilities of these and more broad-based AI tools, I will help teams work when they've got, tens of thousands of documents and complex things. So I publish a free newsletter. I write almost every day. There's over 1,300 people subscribe to it now. It's just at smithstephen.com. It's focused on, primarily legal content. If you just go there, it's free. It will always be free. But I wrote today about zero data retention, right? Legal AI was missing these things. So again, please do it. It's free. And with that, I know we have 2 minutes left, and I apologize that my video went out. So thank you all very, very much for listening and for being here. And if there's any last minute questions, I'm happy to take them.
Feel free to go to the chat box, or if you want to unmute yourself. We're still recording, but feel free. I do have a quick question if no one else does.
Yeah.
When you buy the team level,
Mhm.
who in your firm then has access to that?
You assign the team, right? So what will happen is if you buy the subscription, right, you're sort of, whoever buys it is effectively the admin, like they sort of have the admin control, and then they get to assign the licenses out. So you get to pick, and then you can actually control different rights and audit rights and a couple of other things as well. But it's very straightforward. But again, I encourage everybody to use the Teams or the enterprise ones, just because of all the rulings and the way the bar associations are coming down. They're saying if you use consumer, you're gonna not have privilege.
Okay, and I do see another question.
Yeah.
Someone's asking, did you do the graphics with AI?
Yeah, so all the graphics in there were done in that Gemini tool, and it's amazing. I'll see if I can, while I'm talking, I'll see if I can pull it up in the background. It actually allows you, here, I'll just share my screen real fast. It really does allow you to create, very complex graphics, very complex things. And you can see all the different sort of examples of things that are in there that I'm doing. But that all came from Google's Gemini. Their Nano Banana tool is absolutely fantastic in terms of its ability to create graphics and change styles. You just tell it what you want and it will actually go create it for you. It's incredible.
Great. Let's see. I'm not seeing anything else.
Okay.
So I think with that, I do see one more
Yeah.
about what is your opinion on certain AI tools designed for lawyers like Eve?
I actually don't know that tool, so it's hard for me to have an opinion on that one. I apologize.
So I guess they're coming out with new ones constantly.
There's a ton of them all the time. Look, what I focus on, and look, LexisNexis has AI tools. Westlaw has different tools. I mean, on the high end, you've got tools like Harvey and Ligaro, but I focus on the tools that the average lawyer can go use every day, and they can use them safely and actually drive real value in their business. Which is why I talk about the general commercial large language models. ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini. There are hundreds of specialized tools. The one thing I will say is if you're going to go explore one, ask them specifically what large language model they're using. A lot of these companies are using models that are 6 months, a year, 18 months, 2 years old, and you are going to get much worse answers than what you can get on these frontier models because these frontier models are changing all the time and they're adding capabilities that are amazing all the time.
Excellent. I think with that, we'll bring it to a close. We
All right.
thank you so much for your expertise.
Thank you
Thank
very
you all
much.
for joining, and MCLE will be going out probably by tomorrow morning. Thanks
Great.
again. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.